Sonic Origins is a dream come true for me, to see these amazing classic games in a new light. They were given new life back in 2013, but were strangely restricted to touchscreen controls for 9 years. I've spent that time hoping for a console release, presumably to be sold individually on the digital store, but to see it come in the form of a collection was a welcome surprise. So today, I'd like to speed through all the new features that you won't be able to find in the original game's releases. Naturally, we'll start with Sonic 1, the Blue Blur's first endeavor. Before we even start, we're greeted with a Tyson Hess animated cutscene. This will appear in the standalone games, as well as in story mode, which links all games into one continuous adventure using these cutscenes to bridge the gaps between them. Running along to Green Hill Zone, we first notice the world feels a lot more spacious. Yes, widescreen support. We now see 33% more on our horizontal view, making it easier to see what's ahead of us. Getting acquainted with Sonic's moves, we find that the spin dash has been added to this version, where it hasn't been implemented yet in the original game. But also new to Origins, which you won't even find in the mobile release, is the addition of the drop dash move. This was introduced in Mania, and is implemented nicely into Sonic 1, without feeling out of place. Moving forward to a bed of spikes, we'll see that the spike glitch from the original game has been fixed, so we can stand here a few frames before taking damage again. If we do happen to die here, or even in that pit in Act 3, it won't be a big setback for us, as lives are no longer counted. We can retry as many times as we need, without worrying about getting a game over. But what happens to all these life monitors, and how is a 100 ring count rewarded? Well, Sonic Origins replaces all lives with coins, a currency used to unlock bonuses in the museum. The original Sonic 1 was a solo adventure for the Hedgehog, so you won't find his friends there. But now, Tails can fly solo in his own adventure, with his ability intact. And Knuckles can glide in too, with his climbing ability as well. Now unfortunately, you'll notice there is no option for a Sonic and Tails run, which is a real shame. Sure, they hadn't met at this point, but it feels a bit lonely without the duo. I'll touch on a workaround for this in a bit, but in the meantime, Knuckles and Tails can go their own ways, with a few new routes only accessible with their unique abilities. Sorry, Sonic. But moving along as Sonic, we'll meet Dr. Robotnik for the first time. We see that he's no longer taking any free shots as he enters the arena, though the area is naturally extended now due to the wider screen, so it's even easier to hide from his wrecking ball. This also makes the Egg Crusher boss easier, but Robotnik decided to box us in for the Egg Stinger battle. Collecting 50 rings will still summon a warp ring upon completing a zone, though unfortunately, it's still possible to miss it if you're speeding on ahead. I would have liked to see a free roam during the score count, or at least more time added before having us walk on to the next act. When we do get the ring, the tumbling world we're transported to now sports a much smoother rotation. Rats, I lost. But that's okay actually, because we can now retry any special stage using one of those coins we've been collecting. That's a huge relief. We no longer have to worry about missing out on any of the emeralds. Let's fast forward to Spring Yard, Act 2, the earliest stage we can obtain all 6 emeralds. Yes, the first game only has 6. The 7th emerald, as well as Supersonic, weren't added until Sonic 2, but this is a new version, right? So in the next act, I collect 50 rings and no Supersonic. Okay, maybe they implemented the 7th one into this remake. Speeding through Labyrinth, Act 1 with 50 rings, and no big ring. This is actually a huge disappointment for me. I was hoping the 7th Chaos Emerald, as well as our super forms, would be implemented into a normal playthrough of Sonic 1. But it's not. And that's real unfortunate. I feel like that takes a lot of the excitement away from this remake. Super Sonic is standard in Sonic 2, so it's not too much of a stretch to retroactively add him in to the normal mode of this version of Sonic 1. There is a workaround, though it's not fully ideal. Okay, so back at the start, we can bring up this secret menu using the up, down, left, right code on the title screen. We've got level select, as well as a few options. So if we want what I see to be the ideal Sonic 1 playthrough, we'll have to enable Tails by selecting 0, 0, raise our emeralds to 7, then select Green Hill Zone, Act 1. This will give us a run with the iconic duo, as well as that missing 7th emerald, and the ability to transform into Super Sonic. We can also enable Sonic 3's elemental shields, but let's not get too carried away. So this all sounds good, right? Problem solved. Well, not exactly. Despite that little ring icon spinning in the corner, enabling any of these features will block the game from saving. It counts them as cheats. So you can play a full run like this, but you'll have to do it all in one go. That's a shame. These are features added to enhance the game, but you can't use them in an honest run. Is there any reason why I can't save my progress as Sonic and Tails? Yet a Knuckles and Tails option is available by default in Sonic 2? And is there any reason why Super Sonic should be locked behind a cheat menu even when I work for each of the emeralds I obtain? It doesn't make any sense. Super Sonic is easier than ever to obtain in Sonic 2 and Sonic 3, but is still a hidden feature in Sonic 1. It shouldn't matter that this form wasn't in the game originally, neither were Tails or Knuckles, or even the Spin Dash or Drop Dash, but those are all available for a legitimate run. It just holds Sonic 1 back from being as good as it can be. Sure, I can play it the way I'd like, but I'd also like to be able to save. That's a big feature for this collection, saving between acts, so you can jump between games and jump between characters. I don't want to have to do the ideal Sonic 1 playthrough in one go and lose all of my progress should I decide to do anything else. It really is a shame. If you're listening, Sega, you still have a chance to patch this. Though I've got to continue on in my run. Using cheats, I lament on what could have been, then I return to my regular playthrough. There's not many changes to point out throughout the remaining levels, other than the Egg Spiker boss having these seesaws spread out a bit. And Scrap Brain Act 3 is still just a recolored labyrinth zone. It would have been cool to see the visuals change here, with an original zone theming to help the continuity between the more machine-heavy Scrap Brain and the final zone, which utilizes its assets. Upon defeating Dr. Robotnik, we can watch the ending. There's a bad ending, where Sonic stares at you, then jumps, striking a pose. And Dr. Robotnik flaunts his emeralds. Or if you collected them all, then they flash, sprouting these strange glove flowers, and Robotnik is angry. That's all in the original, but this new version adds in a similar scenario for Tails, and one for Knuckles. There's even a slight alteration if you played through with Sonic and Tails, though adding in that 7th emerald has no effect. The preceding credits show scenes of your player character, and they're almost identical, but what stood out to me is Knuckles does a glide here at Marble Zone, and Tails actually makes it to that top wheel. But all of that aside, Sonic Origins closes us out with a new animation, regardless of if the emeralds were collected or not. Back at the title screen, we can see that it changes depending on our most recent character selection, which is pretty neat. There's one for Tails, one for Knuckles, and even one for Sonic and Tails, which is awesome. Though I feel like they're mocking me. Sure, I'll play as just Sonic. If you were playing story mode, it would have led you straight into Sonic's CD, confirming its place in the classic timeline, though time is all over the place over there. Sonic CD opens up with a brand new scene featuring Amy Rose. We're then presented that classic opening that's thankfully still present, and it's remastered from its original release. If we're on the American soundtrack, we get the iconic Sonic Boom, Sonic Boom, Sonic Boom, and if we're on the Japanese soundtrack, we get That's right, we get both wonderful soundtracks to switch between, whereas the original only had the OST respective to its region. The Origins release even has the You Can Do Anything vocals intact, where they were absent in the 2011 remake. Passing into Palm Tree Panic, we can test out Sonic's moves. To start, he has the Super Peel Out, introduced in Sonic CD, but never really used again, except if you were to choose it in Mania. His Spin Dash has been altered. In the original CD, the Spin Dash feels a bit different than the one we've all grown accustomed to. But in Origins, this Spin Dash is switched to the Sonic 2 style by default, though you can switch back if you prefer. But also new to CD, not featured in the 2011 port, is the Drop Dash, giving Sonic 3 moves to work with. Just like in Sonic 1, all lives are replaced by coins. However, upon obtaining one of these now, Sonic will no longer voice his praise, as all Sonic voice clips have strangely been removed. This in turn means Sonic will no longer get impatient and bounce if you stand still for 3 minutes.
I'm out of here!
Though past and future signs, as well as Dr. Robotnik's laugh, are all still voiced.
Future.
This is such a small change that newcomers, as well as those who haven't played the game in a long time, likely wouldn't even notice, but the fact that Sega went out of their way to remove this just doesn't sit well with me. It was a cool little effect, reflective of this new technology's capabilities, that added a bit more charm to this already unique entry to Sonic's legacy, and they took it out. For what reason? Don't try and tell me classic Sonic doesn't talk, cause he certainly did here, and I'm sure Jaleel White could vouch for classic Sonic's voice, as well as ads, and even Sega Sonic the Hedgehog.
Ooh, I like to hang, but I got a juice. Hey, come on!
So it seems like Sega's trying to rewrite history. Ironically, the premise of Sonic CD, though a mute Sonic, cannot be considered the good future. And it should be noted that the 2011 Taxman version has the voices intact.
I'm out of here!
So what's changed in a decade? Anyway, if you do end up heading towards a bad future, you can now restart a zone if you catch it before the end, where the original had no restart option. And also new to this edition is a playable Tails, which makes the game that much more fun to play through again. Though there's also no Sonic Tails Duo mode here, not even through cheats. So the 2011 version added Tails. Surely Origins would see Knuckles added to the mix, right? No, of course not. Look, Tails was a big deal, being added in 2011, as there had been no other enhanced classic remakes at that time. But after Knuckles was added into Sonic 1 2 years later, it should be considered the standard that the trio be present in any classic remake going forward. It's just not right to leave Knuckles out. But that's really it for major changes. Obviously Sonic 1 had the most to change out of any of these, but there are still various smaller changes within Sonic City that differ from the original, such as Sonic skidding, bringing up dust as he turns around, or the flippers, now having sound effects. And there's now a chime when you are underwater that will play 3 times before the warning. This is present in Sonic 1, 2, and 3, but wasn't in CD until now. These spotlights will no longer strobe, and they scan the sky smoothly. The UFOs have changed color. These ones are now blue, instead of being differentiated only by its stripe color. And if you take too long in the special stage, the warning sound will start about 10 seconds later now. As with all of the bosses, our arena will be expanded to accommodate the widescreen, and it seems like only the egg spinner attempts to keep us from the edges. For a more noticeable change, the music will now loop seamlessly, whereas in the original, it would end and sit in silence a moment before starting up again. Completing the game will give us that wonderful closing animation, in addition to this new one where Sonic flies off in his plane. Doing it without all the time stones will prompt us to try again. Or, if we do have them, we'll see flowers sprout, telling us how cool we are. Unfortunately, there is no other reward for collecting them all. A Supersonic edition would be great for this re-release, or even some other form, considering these aren't Chaos Emeralds we're dealing with. Chrono Sonic? It was planned for the 2011 remake to have Sonic face Eggman in a new Final Fever stage if all of the time stones were obtained, but unfortunately, that stage didn't make it to this edition either. There's some other features I would have liked to see added, like a warp cancel if you didn't want to dash to the past or flash to the future, or an unlockable mode where you can do a full playthrough in your choice of past, future, or good future, or even the ability to time travel at will if you have all of the time stones. I guess you can choose your preference in stage select, but you'll have to put in some extra work to unlock it in this one. The original only required a title screen code like all the other games, but you'll have to master Time Attack to get there in this one. Also unlockable is the sound test, where we can find some hidden bonuses, such as DJ Sonic, or that creepypasta of a message. We can also get a glimpse of a scrapped level that may look pretty familiar if you've played Mania. But this sound select screen holds one final secret, a playable one. It's an additional special stage featuring a giant egghead. This one's pretty cool, though there doesn't seem to be any reward for completing it. Heading back to the title screen, we'll see that the menu is in its original style instead of the 2011 remake menu. But that's all there really is for CD. It's a cool blast to the past, but let's move on to the other Sonic sequel. Sonic 2 will open up with a Tails introduction, and if you're on story mode, you'll find that he has joined up. Sonic 2 refined a lot for the classic series, so not much had to be changed for this release. But one cool thing we can try early on is getting Tails to fly for us. He can lift us to greater heights, like he can in Sonic 3, but you can even do this without a second player. This opens us up to another set of fly-exclusive areas added in the new versions of this game. Definitely makes those abilities feel a bit more special. Collecting 50 rings, then hitting a save post, will of course bring us to the special stage, but take a look at this, the old half-pipe is now rendered in true 3D. Unfortunately, we're still given a Tails tax, where we must collect additional rings because we're not solo. That's pretty annoying, considering dude ends up losing them all anyway. If he makes the boss battles easier, why not let him make the already agonizing special stages easier, not harder? On the plus side though, when returning from the special stage world, we will now retain all of the rings we had before going in, where the original made us sacrifice those rings for our attempt at an emerald. Interestingly though, if you played the Knuckles lock-on, he would refuse to give up his rings. The stages themselves also seem to give Knuckles a break, at least in the original Sonic 2 and Knuckles, but Origins put Knuckles and Sonic on the same ring count. And there's also a Tails tax with Knux, so adding Tails in really does make it the special stage hard mode. Speaking of Tails, when he's on his solo adventure, he can now fly like he does in Sonic 3. He's only seen flying in the original Sonic 2. It's not playable. Knuckles also returns for Sonic 2, but this time, you don't need a lock-on. All of his moves remain, but he can even bring Tails along now. Tails and Knuckles, the underrated duo. If you want to put your teamwork aside and start a competition, you can open up the 2-player mode, where Knuckles is now a playable character. There's even 4 playable tracks that weren't in the original multiplayer. But let's head back to the main game and stop the evil doctor. As with all of these games, our boss ring will be expanded, but it's not always just extra room on the sides, as we see the traps and chemical plant are moved over, and the flicky totems still line the edges despite the wider gap. This game gives you the earliest opportunity to collect all the emeralds, as you only need 50 rings and a star post, as opposed to a level clear or a pre-positioned warp ring. So you can transform as early as Emerald Hill if you search out every lamppost. When you do want to go super, there is now a dedicated button for doing so you'll never accidentally go golden when you're not ready to. Though, just like in the old game, Super Sonic still has some sprites where he's just Yellow Sonic. At least he still has those badass poses when he's pushing or crouching down. And as cool as the supersonic music is, it gets old in a full Super playthrough. A sped up zone theme, or a slight remix, would have been nice for the new release, but oh well. Let's blast on through to Mystic Cave. Remember that pit you'd sometimes fall into, where there is no way out and only spikes to catch you? Well, happily, that's gone in this version. And not just that, falling in here now will bring you to by far the coolest part of this newer release. The Proto Palace Zone that was scrapped from the original game has been reworked as Hidden Palace Zone, not the one from Sonic 3. This isn't a full 2-act zone like the others, but it does feature a new original boss battle against Brass Eggman, where he's practically driving a trombone. Doing this sequence will unfortunately skip past the Drill Egg boss and bring us straight into Oil Ocean, but let's skip even further ahead to the ending. Defeating the final boss will give you the ending for whichever character you played as, and collecting all 7 emeralds will now give us a small scene of the Death Egg crashing, as well as Dr. Eggman taking out his frustrations on the word end. And we can spot a familiar set of eyes in those bushes, a foreshadowing of a threat to come. Unless you played as Knuckles, of course, who, just like Sonic, has slight alterations to the ending if you had the ability to go super. This leaves Tails as the only character of the 3 who doesn't get any sort of reward for collecting all the emeralds. Would it be so hard to alter some frames for my boy? Especially considering Knuckles gets a super form when he wasn't even in this game until Sonic and Knuckles added him. Tails can't even turn super within a level. Yes, even in a 2022 re-release of a remaster of Sonic 2, Tails still can't go super in a normal run of the game. You added an unused level, you added in the drop dash, but you just couldn't reward a Tails player for going through all those special stages again? Why? Just like Sonic 1, no super. Why? Okay. Just like in the Sonic 1 re-release, there is a workaround for the super form, so you have to go into debug mode, meaning once again, you can't save. But if you place the S monitor and attack it as Tails, he can now finally go super. He doesn't have his hyper flickies surrounding him, but he flashes gold and moves as you would expect from a super form, so at least it's possible to do it. It's just a huge shame they make it feel like an illegal move, and it once again holds these remasters back from being as good as they could be. Now, if you hadn't had enough of the half-pipe trying to get super forms for all the characters, you can access a secret 8th special stage new to the 2013 remake. There's no giant Eggman in this one, but it does feature one crazy new effect. Completing this one also doesn't seem to grant you anything, but hey, it's new content. But let's continue on from here. Eggman's plans are foiled, but we get to see a nice little scene of the Egghead meeting the Knucklehead. Sonic and Tails continue their flight onto Angel Island, but there's a few changes in how they do it. As usual, Sonic will transform into Super and fly towards the coast, but now it makes the transform sound effect that you'd hear during gameplay. Also to match the gameplay, Sonic's super form will trail behind some sparkles. There's also some effects on the sand as Sonic soars over it, which is also absent in the original intro. Knuckles breaks through the ground, and he now strikes a combat pose instead of just standing still. You'll also notice Knuckles is no longer discolored. In the original scene, he'll have a more pinkish hue, and will be wearing mostly yellow shoes. This altered form appears in every in-game cutscene featuring the Echidna, but now in Origins, his appearance is fixed in each one. Tails has some changes too. In Sonic 3, he'll fly into the scene as Knuckles steals the emeralds. In 3 and Knuckles, he'll also fly in at this time, but strangely, he'll be facing away from the action. But now in Origins, Tails will be walking in from the same direction Sonic came from. But what was he doing back there? Well, if we switch to Tails, we can see that he actually lands the plane now, before running through the island. Good to know he doesn't just leave it to crash. If we switch to Knuckles' story, we'll see his Sonic and Knuckles intro play out, though it offers no explanation on how he got from Mushroom Hill to Angel Island Zone. In the original game, both Tails and Knuckles have no intro upon loading into the first zone. Going forward on the once floating island, we can once again try out our moves. Sonic 3 introduces the Insta-Shield attack, along with elemental shield moves such as the bounce, the double jump, and the dash. But now in Sonic Origins, the glorious drop dash is added as well. And unlike in the other titles in this collection, Sonic 3's drop dash is modeled after the Mania drop dash, making it feel more fluid. We also have access to the Air Assist ability, where Tails can show Sonic new heights. This was possible in the original Sonic 3, but only if you had help from a second player. Waiting around always gave Sonic some cool impatient animations. In Sonic Origins Sonic 3, a wait animation, unused from the original, will play if you stand still for over a minute. Before we meet our pseudo-first boss, I have to mention that Origins uses Sonic 3 and Knuckles as its base. This means there will be some changes from the Sonic 3 version of the game, made way back in '94. This includes the title screen, featuring the And Knuckles subtitle, this Hydro City Spring being changed to a monitor, Knuckles being a playable character, and yes, unfortunately the mini-boss music being changed. I always hated how 3 and Knuckles switches out this track. The same goes for Knuckles' theme. These musical changes aren't unique to Origins, but we'll talk more music later. When meeting that first boss, our character will now move to the center of the screen to watch its introduction. Jumping into a giant ring, we'll notice the special stages rotate more smoothly now. And more importantly, we can see that the ring count actually counts down now instead of up, making it much more easier to tell when you're about to get a perfect. Moving along to the airship, you might notice it's flying a bit lower now, so we can see a bit more detail. And Tails has figured out how to keep up, so he doesn't end up being bombarded by the falling bombs. After defeating the Egg Scorcher, we get our usual flying capsule. But the unusual thing about the Origins capsule is it will fly away from us after hitting it. Knuckles will break the bridge below us, but in this new version, our controls are locked and we are unable to move. One of my favorite things to do as a kid was to jump to safety after the bridge falls, and proceed to meet Knuckles up on the ledge. This was easiest to do with Tails, but could also be done with Sonic. In Origins, I could not get this to work whatsoever, even if I got to safety, or warped using debug mode. I just couldn't get close to the echidna. I could get up there before the screen lock, but there was no way to spawn Knuckles while up here. Very strange. If you know where all the big rings are, you can go super pretty early on. Using the drop dash in super mode will give a little screen shake effect. There's also new frames as Super Sonic, so no longer will you look up and see Yellow Sonic. The music that plays as Super is now remixed, so it's slightly less repetitive than before. That's a nice touch, but still, I'd prefer if the zone theme wasn't replaced. How cool would it be if there are new zone remixes exclusive to our super forms? That way, the level's theme would remain intact, but we'd get a super badass version of it. Speaking of level themes, one of the most notable changes to this version of the game will be that the Jackson-related songs have all been replaced. This is a bummer, considering Carnival Night's song was one of my favorites in the game. It just feels so sinister. The new theme is still Carnival-esque, and I suppose it fits just fine, but I feel the tone of the level is completely different now, and personally, I feel it's less fun to run through now. Icecap's theme has been altered as well. I feel like both themes work fine enough for this zone, but one thing that will not feel the same is the snowboarding segment. The original Icecap music fit perfectly here. But now, I feel like a lot of the excitement is gone. With all that being said, the launch base change I feel is for the better. I didn't dislike the original track, but it did feel pretty repetitive. This new theme feels like there's a bit more going on, and I really like the military feel it gives. Now, one thing should be noted. These new songs aren't exactly new. They were the prototype tracks discovered later on, and they were even used in the PC's Sonic & Knuckles collection, likely due to a MIDI library issue. I actually don't dislike these tracks, and I found them bouncing around in my head in my time away from Origins, so they're at least catchy. Then again, I was one of the ones who had the Sonic & Knuckles collection growing up. Don't get me wrong, I definitely had the Genesis cartridge first, but I'm no stranger to the themes of the PC release. Anyway, with that all put aside, let's head back to the carnival. Towards the end of Act 2, we'll get locked in a room with this dreaded barrel. But there is one difference now. Our characters will now have a crouch animation when spinning on these barrels. This is huge, as this subtle visual indicator can now give some form of confirmation that you're meant to be pressing up and down on the D-pad to progress. Hopefully now, future first-time fans of this game can avoid getting stuck here indefinitely, like I and so many others have in the past. Of course, if you play as Knuckles, you won't get locked in here to begin with. Instead, he'll run to the end of the level where it just ends. This is also in the Origins version, where there will just be no Knuckles boss at all. That was strange then, and it's strange now. It'd been nice to see Knuckles be given a new unique boss here, like how he fights his own back at Marble Garden. Or at least been given the usual Sonic boss, with slight alterations. Not to mention, he still doesn't have a good transition into this zone to start with. Going back to the boss that does appear, we can see where the act originally ends, and it now has a fan effect at the edge. Fast forwarding to the Egg Rocket boss, the sides will also have this effect, since the screen is now wider than the platform. After this boss is defeated, Eggman brings out his next machine, Big Arms. It's actually pretty cool that he's here. This boss may look familiar if you played through as Knuckles, or if you played the base version of Sonic 3, but for whatever reason, this boss was removed from Sonic and Tails' stories in the combined Sonic 3 and Knuckles, and Sonic Origins added it back in. There is one change in this battle for Origins. In the base Sonic 3, Big Arms was the only boss in the series that could hurt Super Sonic without resorting to crushing. Now in Origins, this has been fixed. There will be a bounce sound, and Super Sonic will continue on untouched. Following his defeat, Robotnik will be shown heading off towards the falling Death Egg. This animation wasn't in either version of the original game, but its sprites can be found unused in the data. The following scene may look familiar, though it wasn't in Sonic 3 or Sonic 3 and Knuckles. It's from the title intro of Sonic and Knuckles. That's pretty cool that they added it here, though it does feel a bit empty without that theme song blasting as soon as the Death Egg lands. Knuckles' sequence here seems to be unchanged. Following him to Mushroom Hill, we'll watch as Knuckles emerges from the secret room. Going inside, we can see the animation has been altered for when our character watches the emeralds fall into place. There's also a pretty substantial skip we can do here. So the original game didn't have a retry option, so they didn't have to worry about this. But if you enter a hyper big ring and pause before it loads, you can hit retry and end up at Hidden Palace, the zone. I'm guessing the game loads the zone before realizing you're only there for the emerald portion of it, and then proceeds to block you in to that specific section. So restarting early enough tricks the game into thinking you're meant to be at the starting act. Pretty neat, but let's not jump that far ahead yet. If you know your way around the Mushroom Valley, you can go hyper before the end of the zone. Yes, the one and only appearance of the hyper form. Sonic gets a new move in this state, This Hyper Flash Dash was also in the Genesis game, but now the Flash has more color to it. Knuckles' hyper form seems to be the same, even with the earth-shattering wall climbs. But Tails got a bit of a change. Originally, Tails could not go super under the same conditions as Sonic and Knuckles. Getting all Chaos Emeralds did nothing for the fox. It was only after collecting all 7 Super Emeralds that he could transform. Now, even though this was done with Super Emeralds, and it had all the intensity of a hyper form, he was still labeled as being Super Tails. This has been fixed in Origins. A true super form has been added for 7 Chaos Emeralds, and the 7 Super Emeralds now label Miles correctly as Hyper Tails, complete with those badass attack flickies. Moving along to Flying Battery, let's switch over to Knuckles. The boss of this zone is the Egg Hanger, and it plays out pretty normal as Sonic. Though with our boy Knuckles, we'll notice he's not up against his usual enemy. Dr. Robotnik was never meant to be here with Knuckles, but he showed up anyway. Sonic Origins fixes this, now featuring the usual bad guy, Egg Robo. That's cool that they fixed it, though I feel like Knuckles' story is still lacking in some ways. Besides the Carnival Night transition, and no boss, Flying Battery has no Knuckles route, and Hidden Palace has no boss fight to replace the Sonic and Knuckles battle. Knuckles doesn't even visit the Death Egg, though that may be for story reasons. It still would be cool to see it as Knux. I'd like to have seen Knuckles' playthrough fleshed out a bit more with this re-release, but he doesn't even have a proper Angel Island intro. But hey, at least we can still scale this mountain and ice cap, and run down Sonic's ski slope. We can even glide out of bounds, and I managed to get that avalanche to fall onto Knuckles. Weren't expecting that, huh, Knucklehead? But Knuckles did get one small change in the ending. As Sonic, if all emeralds are found, Knuckles will be seen with the Master Emerald, watching his new allies depart. In the original, he simply looks to the left. But in Origins, he looks back towards the sky, and the plane now has the thruster activated. In the next scene, we can also see that Sonic's name on the plane is no longer flipped. Though strangely, that same thruster from before is no longer animated in this segment. Once again, Knuckles' part seems unchanged, though the tilt on the floating island looks a bit smoother now. But that's about it for the main story in Sonic 3, though there is one neat change if we switch modes. One cool thing that Sonic 3 did was it had unique zones for its multiplayer stages. While these aren't the full put-together zones like the ones in the main game, they do have their own unique visuals and even their own songs. The only problem is, it's hard to see everything. Well, now in Sonic Origins, these competition stages can be seen in full screen. These are beautiful. Now I really want to see full zones made of these. As for the zones we do have, we can access debug mode to explore them more, taking Sonic or Tails to Knuckles' paths, or vice versa, Knuckles and Sonic's paths. This works for bosses too, so we can exchange Marble Garden's Flying Jillster battle for the more grounded fight with the chain spikes. The appropriate boss character will show up too, so no fighting Egg Robo as Sonic. But have you ever wanted to do the Doomsday Showdown without Super Sonic? Well, debug mode will also allow Tails or Knuckles to save the day. Good thing we collected all the emeralds. Though if you haven't had enough Blue Sphere, going after all 14 stones, you're in luck. Collect Blue Spheres is included in Sonic Origins. This was accessed on the Genesis by using the Sonic & Knuckles cartridge and locking on to Sonic 1, and the result is nearly endless rounds of Blue Sphere goodness. But the fun doesn't stop there, because Sonic Origins includes a new Blue Sphere game called New Blue Spheres, making this the third entry into the Blue Sphere saga after Mania's Blue Sphere. New Blue Sphere is also in widescreen, unlike the port of the original Special Stage game. But that about does it for Sonic 3, though with Blue Sphere covered, we've already started to explore some of Sonic Origins' bonus content. So let's look at the other modes. So we talked a bit about Story Mode. Basically it strings together each of the games as Sonic, and shows new scenes between them. But once you complete the whole thing, you'll see the Sonic Origins ending scene. This one has to be the best of them all. Moving along to Mission Mode, we'll speed through 71 different challenges, including some extreme difficult ones. These are typically pretty fun to play through, with many of them offering unique and creative takes on each game's mechanics or level gimmicks. This really gives a cool new perspective on all these classic levels, and is a bit reminiscent of Sonic Adventure's Mission Mode. Optional challenges that are at the very least cool to check out. Another fun mode to dive into is the Boss Rush mode. You pick a game and choose your character, then you're faced with every one of that game's bosses, all in a row. Sometimes there's rings, sometimes there's not, and it's bound to take you a few tries if you're not fully familiar with each enemy's patterns. Knuckles' battles will naturally differ when it comes to Sonic 3, though he is fighting Egg Robo the entire time. It would have been a cool touch if Egg Robo replaced Eggman for Knuckles' Sonic 1 and 2 battles as well, both for Boss Rush and the games themselves, as chronologically, it doesn't make much sense that he'd fight Eggman, then go on to be tricked into thinking he was the good guy. If you're still standing after all that battling, you can give Mirror Mode a shot. It doesn't change the game itself, but it does flip around all that you've become familiar with, leaving you disoriented in sections you know you've completed before. It's interesting to approach it differently, even if it is just from the other side. Once we're back on the right track, we can do a throwback and access Classic Mode. Sonic Origins has added a lot of cool new features that we went over today, so using Classic Mode, we can jump back and see how these games were in their untouched forms, right? Well, not exactly. Despite the implications, Classic Mode is not true to the original games. There's a spin dash in Sonic 1, and Knuckles and Tails are available through level select. Sonic 2 has the airlift and Hidden Palace Zone. Sonic CD has the remastered animation, and Sonic 3 obviously has the new music, but also Egg Robo and Flying Battery, among other fixes. Really all they did to make this classic was they added lives, removed the drop dash and quick character selections, and then covered a portion of the screen. These are the same Retro Engine Anniversary Mode editions, only altered to try and pass as classic. But why? Implementing these changes had to have been more work than just dropping in the Mega Drive ROMs. It's not like there isn't already a Genesis emulator coded for each of the consoles Origins released on. Why not just carry that over? The whole point of Classic Mode is to see how these games actually were at release before these enhancements, but this is a fabrication of the OG experience. What's the point if you're not getting the actual classic games? Might as well just play the Anniversary editions with all the features intact, instead of this fake out. The only benefit I can see to this is the lives counter. But if that is clearly made working within the new versions, then why not just make it an option to switch lives on? So Classic Mode doesn't really do it for me, but there's more than one way to relive the past. Let's visit the museum. So in the museum, we can rewatch any of the animations we've unlocked, but it also includes Sonic Mania Adventures, which is a pretty neat surprise. There's also symphony footage, and animatics, which is cool. Though no commercials, or snippets from the shows, unfortunately. There's various illustrations and box arts to look at, and lots of level music, as well as some remixes too. And in the player, we can switch which characters move to the groove. And all of that is unlocked by using those coins we've been collecting, assuming you haven't used them all on special stages. Though to be honest, the coin collecting feels a bit unbalanced. You collect a decent amount throughout your various playthroughs, and it still feels rewarding when you smash that monitor or gather 100 rings. But once you try your hand at mission mode, you'll start to win loads and loads of coins, making that jackpot feel a little less exciting. Though I guess none of that really matters, because you can easily cheat the coins in debug mode. If you want to go back to playing fair, you can check out your rankings in each act and race against your time or for that top spot. But if you're still looking for a challenge, unfortunately the trials end there. The 2013 versions of Sonic 1 and 2, as well as the 2011 Sonic CD, all had in-game achievements for you to unlock, and they add some fun extra objectives to go after. But strangely, none of those achievements were carried over to Sonic Origins, despite being based off of those remasters. Now, if you're not playing on Switch, you will have some new trophies and achievements for Origins, though it's looking extremely easy to platinum. Even still, I'd like to be rewarded with those on Switch, but it's not in-game achievements. I'm surprised Nintendo still hasn't implemented their own trophies and achievements by now. They'd probably call them Nintendo badges, or something silly like that, but I'm going a bit off topic. So Origins is missing achievements, but it does do one thing better than its mobile counterpart. In those versions, Knuckles and Tails had to be unlocked by accomplishing certain things as Sonic, but Origins has all playable characters available from the start, though the character select menu could use some work. Besides Knuckles' head being trimmed, and Tails being the only one not standing static, the Origins player select has some limitations. First off, you can't do multiple playthroughs as one character. There's one slot for each, and one slot for each grouping. And second, it's easy to overwrite your slot. Choose your character, but don't bump the wrong button, or you'll be forced to start over. But overall, the selection screen is just a bit cluttered. Sonic 1 looks fine, but 2? That's a lot going on. Why not just have the core 3, and then press up on the D-pad to add on Tails? And worse yet, your collected emeralds aren't even shown. This menu style is especially strange considering how Sonic 3 perfected the selection and Mania used the same format, but it's not even consistent because Origins Sonic 3 does use its original character selection, while Sonic 1, 2, and CD have this. It's functional, sure, but each of these had previous releases with better selection styles. It's just strange to me, but let's move away from character selection and watch these characters in their natural habitats. So in the background of the menu, we have 3D renditions of each game's corresponding island. So there's South Island, Never Lake with Little Planet, West Side Island, and the Floating Angel Island. And these scenes change over time, with freed animals running about after completing each game. We can even swap the scene slightly by releasing the tether on Little Planet or bringing Angel Island back to the water. There's also 2 additional islands that may look familiar. Mount Mobius from Sonic Spinball is used for the mission menu, and Flicky Island from Sonic 3D Blast is used for the museum menu. Although these 2 games aren't featured in this collection, it's still really cool to see them get some recognition in the island cams. We can zoom in on all of these, viewing the scenes in greater detail, though unfortunately, Knuckles and Amy never come out to play. But now that every island has been explored and every story has been resolved, that closes us out on reviewing all of the new features that Sonic Origins offers. It was cool to see the drop dash added in every one of these games, and to be able to play Sonic 1 as Tails and Knuckles, and to see Sonic 3 finally get a remake is astounding. These games have been made a bit easier with the infinite lives, no time over, and special stage retries, but actually, I don't really mind any of that. It was a blast to speed through every one of these games multiple times and not have to worry about replaying full zones because I ran out of lives. Though I feel like out of anything, they should have altered the smashes. Crush Death has got to go. Unfortunately, this collection was not perfect, with a Sonic and Tails team being absent in Sonic CD, and also in an official run of Sonic 1, and a lack of Super Sonic in both, and no Super Tails in Sonic 2. And the strangest of all is the lack of Sonic voice clips in Sonic CD. But overall, if you manage to play through with minimal glitches, it's hard not to see this as the definitive way to play these games. It's difficult to top the authentic Genesis experience, but for the modern age, Origins is a great way to relive the classics with some additional flair. But maybe the fun doesn't have to stop there. When Sonic Mania first released, it was the base game with a digital-only distribution, but sometime later, Sonic Mania Plus came along on physical with a new DLC. So maybe Origins will receive a Plus as well, and there's plenty I'd like to see from it. A story mode for Knuckles and Tails would be great, especially if they got their own animations. And Knuckles deserves to be able to glide and climb around in Sonic CD's levels, so add him in there too. Though there's two others already in that game that would be awesome as playable characters, Amy Rose and Metal Sonic. Amy could be given a double jump as her ability, and Metal Sonic could be given an air dash, though I wonder who he would face in the boss battles, or if he'd race Sonic and start a speedway. Actually, Tails Doll could be added for Tails' section, and Mecha Knuckles for the Knucklehead, so I guess a 16-bit Zero would be the best fit for Amy. The original Sonic 3 added zone transitions to the series, a seamless way to connect each level, which was also carried over to Sonic Mania. I'd love to see these creative transitions implemented into Sonic 1, 2, and CD as well. One of Mania Plus's biggest features was Encore Mode, which changed the color palette for each zone as you played along swapping characters. Sonic Origins Plus could instead do a zone randomizer, so you and your swappable characters would never know which level from which game would be coming up next. For a visual change, give us the ability to do a sprite swap, so you could do Sonic 3's sprite in Sonic 2, Mania Sonic in Sonic 3, or even 8-bit Sonic in Sonic 1. But speaking of 8-bit Sonic, how cool would it be if all of the Game Gear, or preferably Master System games, were added into the mix as a bonus? Though, if I'm already dreaming, I might as well ask for them in their own Origins-style remake with added features. Or even a Master System collection, which is long overdue. Sonic 3D and Spinball get a bit of recognition in Origins, so why not add them in as well? Sure, they're both already playable on all the same consoles, but why not improve them as well? Just widescreen would be enough, but why not John Burton's director's cut of 3D Blast? Or some improvement over Spinball, with a save feature between zones. But I think the most appropriate addition would be Knuckles Chaotix, though I feel a lot of work would need to be done. I speak about that as well as other needed collections, in this video here, so why not keep the discussion going there? Bottom line, I hope this isn't all we get for Origins, because I want to see these games continuing to get even better, and I especially hope there's more improved collections on the horizon, starting with the Master System or Sonic Advance. But only time will tell at this point, so until then, I'll see you in the next zone, and I appreciate you sticking around.
You feel tight, look at yourself. Inside your heart.